me ask you the $1 million question that I usually ask some guests, which is, why do you think the humanity is and has always been anti-Semitic? Because it's a different hatred, I think. It's rooted on a different sentiment. Some people don't like Chinese or Indians or Russians or whatever. But Jews, it's like across the board. Doesn't matter what period of the history. You can always find an anti-Semitic on the room. I take it for granted. And I don't know why is that.
I don't think that it's a constant. And there are moments in history when it's not particularly important, other times when it's very dangerous. And I think also the meaning of anti-Semitism has changed quite dramatically. So, for example, if you take the Middle East historically, anti-Semitism was much weaker in the Ottoman Empire than it was in Europe. And the position of Jewish people in Egypt or in Turkey was much better than it would have been in France or in East Europe. So there are different moments that occurred. I think historically there's a difference between what I call classical Christian anti-Semitism, which is really bound up historically with the charge that Jews had killed Christ and are responsible for all the evil things that have occurred. That kind of anti-Semitism is today much, much weaker than it would have been in the past. And you have a situation where Jews became the enemy precisely because they did not have a nation. And because they didn't have a nation, they were seen as this almost anti-national, globalist force that existed beyond the borders. And a group of people that had no loyalty to Germany or to Hungary or to France or to Britain. And that anti-Semitism, paradoxically, was a reaction to the fact that Jews had lost their homeland. And when Jews regained their homeland, I think that to some extent became tempered and became not so significant. And, Israel had a free pass for about 20, 30 years. By and large, in the West, the opinion was very much, pro-Israel. And it was only in the 1970s that you had the beginnings of the new kind of anti-Semitism, what I call a left-wing anti-Semitism, a radical anti-Semitism, which has a different source. It's got to do with the fact that hatred for the West was very much focused on Jewish people, because Jews were seen as not just white, but as hyper-white, as somehow they were more successful white than anybody else. And I think that's one of the reasons why all these LGBTQ organizations, all these identity groups are so much for Hamas and so much against Israel.
Which is mad. So here in Ireland, one thing that I found absolutely nuts is the anti-Semitism. It goes from two directions. So you have what you were just saying, the hardcore Catholics who hate Jews because apparently they killed Jesus. And then you have the far left, the likes of Sinn Féin, and then they are all friends with the LGBTQ and all that. And they all get together. When it comes to this, they are best friends. Like they will never sit in the same pub. They will never cheer for the same on the same crowd. But if it is about Jews, no problem. They are friends like ever.
Well, I think Ireland is an extreme example. It's probably the one nation where hatred for Israel is very, very strong. It's partially got to do with the fact that a lot of Republicans believe that the struggle of Hamas against Israel was like their struggle against Britain. Yeah. So they kind of identify stupidly with what has gone on there, not realizing that before the Second World War, the Zionist movement and Sinn Féin and the Republicans were very closely allied together. So it was a very different scenario, but they've just lost the plot. And then in addition to that, you have to remember that identity politics is very strong in Ireland. So when you have that Republican tradition, when you also have the identity movement, and then you have some of the old school, incorrigible Catholic hatred for the Christ killers, you have this very strong coalition of anti-Semitism.